Hello. Okay, so this is going to be part one of your guided walkthrough for Lab Assignment 1. Now, for the most part, I'm going to try to keep things very similar to the setup that you would see in your lab. And you'll see that here I have essentially three icons for AutoCAD Architecture 2014. The English or US Imperial, Global, and the Metric sort of shortcut. Now, since for the most part we won't be using Metric here, you can, in my case, I eventually just delete that shortcut. Now, I'm starting out AutoCAD out. I left basically all the settings as they are in default. So these should be fairly similar to whatever you would be seeing in lab. Now you'll get this sort of warning almost every single time you open a new template file because we will be all kind of running an educational version, and it will kind of tell you. Any sort of DWG files that have been edited by an educational version will get a educational version watermark on the edges of the image whenever you output it, either as a PDF or a plot, etc., etc. And that's sort of their way of kind of keeping control over the license. A lot of this stuff will pop up. You can just close it. I think there are a couple other panels or pop-ups that usually pop up here, but they're not there in my case, but you might get them simply because the lab setup, it's a virtual machine, so it kind of wipes everything clean every single time, which can be sort of annoying sometimes. Now you'll notice that my cursor is actually, my crosshair here is a different color. That's something that you can set, and I was actually changing that for a specific reason, and you'll see why in a little bit. But let me revert that to normal just really quickly, because it will show you how to change that. Okay, so this should be more or less what you're getting as well, starting out. And if you've already kind of watched some of the fundamental videos, then you'll know how to navigate with your middle mouse button, scroll in and out. These are very basic things. You'll notice that there is kind of a limit to how far you can pan, and we'll kind of get to that eventually if we need to, how to deal with that problem. Okay? Now, to kind of start out the assignment, obviously, you should have the JPEG for sort of base drawing saved somewhere. So if you go to the course website module, then you would be able to download this JPEG and put it in a folder, right? Put it in a folder called, for example, Lab 1, so you know where it is. Okay? So this is in the Lab 1 folder on my desktop. You can do something similar. And we're going to start out by inserting that image into the AutoCAD file. So on the top, in the tabs, go to the Insert, Attach, over here on the upper left. And this basically says all image files. So you can navigate, in my case, I'll navigate to Desktop, Lab 1, and the Meyer Douglas House section. And click Open. You'll get this attach image dialog box. There are some, options. You can keep them more or less the same. This is something you can consider changing. Now, the difference between the full path and the relative path is the full path will basically kind of remember the absolute path. So in this case, because it's on my desktop, it'll remember the location of this file as, C, documents, whatever my username is, desktop, lab 1 folder, and then this image. If it's saved as a relative path, then basically what it'll do, and you'll get that, obviously you'll get that sort of warning that you need to kind of save the file before you can actually do it this way. Relative lab means that it will actually look at the relative location of your saved AutoCAD file. So for example, if your AutoCAD file is saved in the same folder as this image, then you can move the folder around and it will always be able to find this particular file. So that's a kind of a nice nifty thing to do. So actually let's just do that. I'll go save here, desktop lab 1, and I'll just call it LabAssignment01. And put my name behind it for now. Okay, so same thing, I'll go to insert, attach. It should go default back to where we were earlier. And then let's actually change this to relative path. And now it will allow me to do it. Okay, you can show details, it gives you some information, but this is sort of more, just so you know. Once you say OK, it will ask you, it will prompt you to insert the image into the model space. So I'll click anywhere. Be careful when you move this around because it can kind of go crazy really fast. But you'll see that here, while you're moving this, there's a sort of polar tracking tooltip that kind of tells you how big the sort of distance you're moving really is. Just do something that seems reasonable. We'll kind of work and rescale this image afterwards. Okay, so now you'll see that this background JPEG has been inserted, and there's a sort of frame around it, right? And so it also, you'll see that this actually allows you to kind of change some of the clipping boundaries, the fading, brightness, contrast of the image itself, background transparency, etc., which might come in a little bit useful later on. But let's just sort of work with this for now. Now I'm going to switch back to the Home tab. You'll see that most of what you need to use is here, but in a lot of cases, like you saw Jeremy kind of talk about in his fundamentals videos, using the keyboard shortcuts can be really helpful. So the first thing we will want to do, actually, because we need to kind of rescale this base drawing to the sort of correct dimensions, right? Now, one thing to remember when you're drawing in AutoCAD that you're always trying to draw things at full scale, which means if a building is 50 feet long or 50 feet wide, then you should draw 50 feet basically in the AutoCAD model space. All of the sort of scaling happens after the fact when you're outputting it for a drawing, because you might eventually be outputting this at a variety of different scales. So that's sort of important to remember, that you'll always be drawing at full scale at the size of what the thing really is. Okay? Now since we're going to have to rescale this, and this is, you can now see why I actually changed my cursor color, because when my crosshair is in the sort of white background, it disappears, right? So I'll show you really quickly how to change that. Go to upper left, the sort of AutoCAD A icon, click on it. Down here in the options, now there's a lot of options here. You'll eventually learn to kind of like work with these, but the one we're looking for is drafting, and in the first upper left panel, colors. Now here is actually where you can change basically the visual appearance of almost everything. And so the background, I can change the background color if I wanted to, which I actually do, but I'm sort of more used to using the gray background, but I'll keep it black for the purposes of this, just so not to mess people up. The crosshairs, I can change it from white to any of the cardinal colors or any of these colors in the AutoCAD colored index or any sort of gradients, in between. So this is where you can kind of find all this stuff. But for now, I'm just going to change it to magenta. Apply and close. Okay. And that's it. So now my crosshairs is magenta and I can actually see it now. Now the second thing is that if I draw a line by default, and I'm using the L, typing L into my keyboard, and you'll see on the bottom a lot of the sort of options that start with L will automatically pop up, right? But I can, since the shortcut key for line is L, I'll just do L spacebar or L enter, whichever sort of floats your boat. And you can draw lines. Now the dilemma we have here is obviously these lines are white and they disappear, right? So what we need now is actually a different layer to put these lines on. So up here in the layers panel, the one on the very upper left, layer properties, if you click on it, it will bring up the layer properties dialog box and show you your current layers. Now this is the 0 default layer, so let's just make a new layer here with the new layer, and also the shortcut key for it is Alt-N, as you can see as I hover over it. So if I click on this, make a new layer, it'll ask me to name it. So I'll just call it reference. And enter. Okay. And change the color of it. So I'll just click on the color palette in the center and change it to magenta. Right? And we'll be making more layers later on, but for now this is enough to sort of get us going. Okay? Now, one of the things we really want to do here is actually look at the scale. The scale tells us that that length is supposed to be 30 feet. Now we don't really know if this is scaled correctly. And if I run a quick distance, DIST, measure, and I just roughly measure here to here to get a sense of that, it tells me that's actually, oh, we're not too far, that's 24 feet, okay? So this is a sort of a trick that you eventually learn or use to kind of scale these sort of background drawings correctly. I'll draw a line first, and I'll kind of zoom in to the lower left of the scale and basically kind of try to position it as accurately as possible. Draw it to the right. Now, if your settings are correct, by default you should have this behavior, the tracking, polar tracking behavior, and also the sort of cursor tooltip that's on the top that's telling you how long whatever line you're sort of dragging out is. So now I will drag it to the right, basically, making sure that it's snapping to the polar horizontal. Type in 30 feet, right? Make sure the apostrophe is there, 30 feet. Enter. And enter again. Okay. I forgot actually here to change my layer. So let's highlight, or you can just click, or you can drag, select, from the upper left to the lower right. Boundary select the line we just drew and actually switch it to the red reference layer so it shows up. And also a good thing to do is actually change your, like I just did, click on this and change your active layer to the reference layer, like that. So now everything I draw will be on the reference layer. So because this I just drew as exactly 30 feet, and we can verify that by just doing the distance command again, and check that out, 30, okay, it says delta x 30 feet, okay, 30 feet 0 inches. So we know that this red line segment is 30 feet now. Now one of the things I do actually here is add these sort of little legs. It doesn't really matter if they're aligned or not. But I have these little legs to kind of help me see things a little better. Okay, so now these pivot points are fixed. What we want to do now actually is to first rotate this background bitmap just slightly, because you can see like this there's a slight angle between the horizontal. And this happens often when you have a scan drawing, right? It's almost impossible to align it horizontally perfectly. And you can actually see this really, if, for example, I zoom in here and try to draw a horizontal line, you'll see that the floor here is obviously not flat. Okay, so it's at a slight degree angle. And this is sort of actually kind of intentional. Okay, so what we want to do is rotate this background bitmap just a little bit. But how do we, make sure that we're just rotating just the right amount? Okay, so if you have it selected, you can go to here and actually pick the rotation, or you can just use the shortcut key and just say rotate, ROT, as long as it's sort of like, the first couple letters of the command are correct, then you can actually usually kind of pick it. So right now it asks me to specify a base point. The base point is actually going to be this lower left corner. And then it asked me to specify either to enter a rotation angle or a reference. Now, by default, this is what it does. I haven't really clicked anything, right? By default, it will just do that. And you just sort of enter a rotation angle or just click and, let it go. That's sort of hard to do, though. So if I repeat the rotate command and click on the lower left as my anchor, and you'll see here you have the option to use copy or reference, and we want to click on reference here. So this actually sets up a situation where I can specify a reference line to use as an input. So again, I'll click on that sort of pivot point that we had set up earlier, and this line will be used as a reference for the rotation of the background bitmap. So now you want to do is actually kind of zoom into the lower right of the scale. And with that command active, basically click on the lower right corner here, which will set that up as a reference angle and snap to the endpoint there. Okay, so the endpoint is the sort of endpoint of the line that we drew earlier. And so now you'll see that, okay, the scale or the horizontal of the scale is now actually aligned to the reference line that we drew earlier. So now we know that the horizontals should be, aligned a bit more properly. It won't be perfect because this is a kind of a, low quality, crappy scan, which is intentional because we want you to kind of infer a lot of the information as you're going, right? It's not just a sort of a mindless tracing sort of job. We kind of want you to think about what you're drawing. Now, once that's done, we can now actually try to scale this drawing. So we basically want to scale the whole drawing so that this scale matches the real 30-foot line segment that we drew. Okay, so scale, I'm just typing this in. Select objects, so obviously we select, I just did the crossing selection on the background image itself, so it's highlighted. Right click to kind of enter, go to the next step, and then specify the base point, which is same pivot point that we used earlier. And it does the same thing, right? You can kind of, it will go sort of crazy because it's sort of trying to scale dynamically. But if you click on the reference sort of option here, then I can click on the lower left, click. And so here, I basically want to use as a reference this sort of the location that's on the bitmap as a reference, and then snap it to the end of the line segment that we drew. And now these two will be matched up more or less, not perfectly, but pretty close. Okay, so now we know that that length is 30. And so whatever you're drawing here will actually make sense now in terms of the dimensions. So let's just take a real quick look. And so for example, if we measure this balustrade, that looks like 3 foot and roughly 3 inches, right? So that kind of starts to make sense, right? That's sort of like the general height of railing or balustrades. So now the dimensions in this are real physical dimensions. Okay, so now we've sort of pin down the scale of everything. And so the next sort of steps, and you can actually do away with this now, delete that if you don't need it. Now for the next steps, we will start to work on the drawing itself.